It really is starting to set in with me how much I love this Foundations product compared to the old Elite product. And the reason is giving you an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours of content each month. By the time you're done with month 4 here, you're definitely going to have seen 6 or 7 hours of tutorial content, which is more than the entire Elite app had for tutorial content from the start. And really the difference is when I was making the Elite content, I thought to myself, I really need to reinforce this idea more or that idea more, but I didn't think that I could ask somebody to buy the app and then on day one just give them 9 hours of tutorial content. It would just be overwhelming. It's too much. And so taking it slower like we're doing here, but then really reinforcing these ideas and letting them build upon each other, so you're getting new content every 2, depending if it's Virus Mania or not, or 4 weeks, I really think has to be letting this settle in a lot more before we start layering on top of it. Because by the time we get to this content now, we're going to start talking about course conditions, weather conditions. Like, if you had just bought this app and were bored on a Saturday and watched all this stuff to this point, there's no way you would be understanding it. But hopefully, letting it build is really letting it sink in before we keep on adding additional layers upon layers, ultimately resulting in a pretty confusing mess. So for Analyze, we started off in month 3 with the basics, the really penal hazards, and now we've shown you in the beginning of month 4 that we can start getting more aggressive in certain spots, and we've really kind of honed in on what the actual math is from start to finish on how you treat the actual structural hazards, the design features. Now we're going to start taking into consideration the course conditions that day, as well as weather and a few other factors. We're going to start in hot and humid St. Louis at Bellerive Country Club on the 13th hole of the final round of the PGA Championship. I just want you to listen to this ball when it lands on the green. It just has that nice resounding splat sound. It's not even the ball bounced in the air or spun back or bounced forward. It just has that splat, and it's just not going anywhere when it lands, period. Now, it's a par 3. You're hitting this shot off of a flat piece of ground, off of a tee. It is really hot. It is dead calm. Look at the flag sticks. Look at the trees. There is no movement in the air. It's playing 188 yards this day. Brooks is hitting an 8-iron. And again, look at the flag stick when it comes into play. There's just no movement on the flag. And again, it has that same splat.
Oh, yes, it will. What a shot there by Koepka.
I'm going to back this up just a tad because I want to show you a few things. First of all, this flag stick is not moving at all. But most importantly, this is an optical illusion. This native area, rough, hazard, whatever you want to call it, is actually about 10 or 12 yards off the green. It is not in play in these conditions, period. And so this is, even though it doesn't look like it, this actually is a flag that you can get pretty aggressive towards. You can see it a little bit better when we back out to the full overhead view that they created for the tournament package. And this pin was 4 yards from the right edge this day. They've actually got a decent amount of room with the fringe. And then it goes way on down before you actually get to where the penalty area comes in play. I know this isn't exactly easy to see here, but now we're going with the down the line view as much as I can possibly zoom in on YouTube. And you can really see here where this is the penalty area. And it's just way right here's the flag stick, here's the edge of the green. It's way over there, and it really is interesting how much closer the optical illusion made it look on TV. And the reason I'm bringing this up and talking about this at all is a tour player was texting me, I'm sorry, but this guy is aiming, this guy being Brooks, is aiming right at every single flag back here. And my reply was, as he should be. And this is where people, when they don't understand Decade, I mean literally all of Decade, they don't realize that we do have modifiers for conditions. So if it's soft like this conditions are right here, you can subtract 1 from the baseline number. If it's calm, I mean literally dead calm, 5 miles an hour or less, there's no real oscillation, real variability in wind, you can subtract another 1 from that baseline number. The up and down from right of this green was absolute cake. You were going to have a nice little uphill lie. You were going to be chipping uphill. Really doesn't get much easier than that up and down was, so it can easily be a -1. Again, remember, that's compared to just something average. This is definitely an easier situation than average. So now, because of course conditions and weather, we can take off an extra 3 yards from the 180-yard baseline number of 9 yards. Technically, our shot pattern should be aimed centered about 6 yards from the right edge of the green. This pin was 4 yards from the right edge of the green. Yeah, it kind of seems like he's aiming it basically right at it. But the situation warrants that. He's got a lot of things going in his favor. It's hot, it's calm, it's soft, it's a par 3, it's off a tee, it's off a flat piece of ground. He's probably going to hit a decent shot here. Adding all of this up and all these factors are exactly what Bryson meant when he said, "He's helped me understand the percentages of going for flags, when to go for flags, and when not to." Everyone who plays great golf and has any sort of a career on the PGA Tour learns all of this at some point. You're just learning it quicker in a systematized fashion. And the key to this is, again, I know it seems like a lot, but this is all what has to be considered to make any sort of a sound decision in golf. Ultimately, any sport that you use a ball in, the real strategic decisions come down to how much control do you have over that ball. And in golf, since it's the largest outdoor sport played in the world, with the ball in the air the longest over the longest span, the outside influences simply have a lot of impact on how much control you have over the ball. So as we just saw, you can get a little bit more aggressive when the situation warrants it, when it's dead calm. The opposite of that is true if it's windy. This is a nice study done by Oliver Morton where he just did a TrackMan study showing with the exact same ball speed, launch angle, and spin rate. A ball in calm situations with those characteristics will carry 184 yards. Into a 10-mile-an-hour headwind, it'll only carry 166. Into a 20-mile-an-hour headwind, it'll only carry 143. Now, I disagree with his deduction of 1 club per 5 miles an hour. I mean, I understand he's just trying to put some sort of a metric on it, but it's not like you'd stand out there with a 6-iron from 143 and launch it straight up into the wind. You would lower the launch angle, you would lower the spin rate as a result, and you would actually carry it significantly further. But the idea is sound. The key to this is look how much just a 20-mile-an-hour headwind is moving a ball 41 yards difference. Well, and it's not like it's blowing 20 miles an hour just like a wind tunnel, just dead calm. So what we do differently in Decade once it starts getting windy is if it's blowing from 0 to 9 miles an hour, the tens digit is a 0, so you just use the baseline. Now, yes, I did just show you that if it's blowing 5 miles an hour or less, you can take 1 off of the baseline. I also don't think that's completely necessary, but it is something that I tell my tour players they can do if they want to get a little bit more aggressive because of the situation, the weather warrants that as being possible. If it's blowing from 10 to 20, the tens digit is a 1. You add 1 to the baseline. 20 to 30, the tens digit is a 2. Add 2 to the baseline. Over 30, add 3 to the baseline. And this is really just because you're going to have less control over the ball. Again, if it's blowing 10 miles an hour, it's not like it's just blowing 10 straight. It's probably blowing from 5 to 15. And so you've got a lot of variability, a lot of just luck with what wind happens to hit your shot. That's going to basically dictate exactly where that ball winds up going. It's interesting because any shot you've ever hit in your life that went close, that had more than 5 or 8 miles an hour of wind, I'm not going to say it was luck, but it was really lucky where that ball specifically wound up stopping. Again, the real strategic decision you have for any sport involving a ball is how much control do I have over the ball. In football, if a quarterback's going to throw a pass, how much control does he have over where that pass specifically will go? So on a shorter route, he can throw it into a tighter coverage because he's going to have a little bit more control over exactly where that ball goes. In tennis, if you're a better player, you can try to paint the baseline or the sidelines with your shots a little bit more and really make your opponent stretch out in order to get it. Same thing in golf. How much control do I have over the ball? And that's directly impacted by how windy it is because of the variability within that wind. Another thing this is part art, part science. For me, I live in Dallas. It's flat as a pancake. I'm not very good on side hill or up and downhill lies. So for me, I need to add another 1 or 2 because it's just not what I'm really good at. You might be from the mountains where you get to play with side hill lies a lot more than I do. Maybe you're really good at it. It might just be a 0 for you. Again, this is where it's part art, part science, but we're going to really dial these targets in based on your abilities. And again, this is where you'll play around with it a little bit, learning what the surrounding hazards are. If there are 0, 1, or a 2, takes a little bit of practice and work. Understanding lies, that takes a little bit of work to know if you're good or bad at it. The next course-related modifier is how firm is it playing. This is number 5 at Bentry Country Club, and what I'm trying to imply here is that we've got a front hole location, and the greens are firm, and so if you land it anywhere in here, it's simply going to run to the back of the green or the middle of the green. These are the shots that people typically try to bounce up or run up to the green just a little bit. Now we're going to switch over to Google Earth so I can show you the exact same hole. And as you can see, this green is roughly 20 yards wide. And if you're trying to bounce anything up to this front hole location, you can see that the rough and the bunker actually pinch it even more narrow than that to only 16 yards. Well, obviously half of that is 8. So the baseline modifier from 150 or 160 yards is 8. You could maybe try to bounce it up from 160 or less, but if you're trying to bounce it up from any further than that out, you're simply going to hit an awful lot of shots into this bunker or an awful lot of shots into this rough. And the reason that I drew this out this way is I show you right here where I cut these balls off, like where they landed, because obviously they landed so they stopped a little bit quicker rather than running to the back of the green. Well, if I'm trying to bounce them up, those shots would be landing right here in the rough. Now you're short-sighted to a short pin on firm greens. This is the worst. This is almost guaranteed bogey. And that's what I don't think a lot of people like. You just look at this, looks like a huge area to be trying to bounce it up through, but it's just not. And this is where using TrackMan or just understanding the size of a few obstacles on your driving range, and then just try to flight some shots in between a 15 or 18 yard wide opening. And trust me, you're going to miss that a whole lot. And those are shots that are for sure going to be winding up in this bunker, either short-sighted at the pins here, or in this bunker with a long bunker shot, or in this rough, either short-sighted here, or in this rough with a longer shot. You simply need to trust that in this situation, the scoring average is not going to be low, period. Firm greens are essentially the best way to keep scores high. At Riviera every year, some years the greens are pretty firm, and the winning score is not more than a few under par, and that's even considering that number 1 is basically a par 4. It's a par 5 that plays with a scoring average right at 4 or 4.1. They just don't shoot very far under par, and that's entirely because of the greens being pretty firm. Next, we have to consider, are we in the fairway or are we in the rough? And as this slide shows, Decade is from the fairway only. This is Rob Rochelle out at TPC Scottsdale hitting a 7-iron from the 9th fairway the day before the FBR Open a couple years ago. Nothing too interesting, 165-yard 7-iron, 7,000 RPM of spin. But once he went and kicked his ball off into the rough, he told me that he stood this rough up and buried the ball. Obviously it comes out and carries only 88 yards with 1,300 RPM spin. Clearly a really bad lie. But this is the critical one. Here he is hitting a shot that carried 168 with only 3,300 RPM spin. He laid this rough down and then he set the ball on top of it perfectly. This is the shot that all good players would look at and be like, yeah, it's going to come out of here fine. It is going to come out of here fine. It is not going to be a problem to get this ball to the green. But we're going to lose over half of our spin. And the real key, as we were just talking about, you control the ball by putting not just spin on it, but a consistent amount of spin. The flyer is when the ball comes out with less spin, it's going to have less friction with the air as it shoots through the air, and it's going to carry further. So in this situation, it's not really that it's hard to get the ball out of the rough and up and around the green. It's just the simple fact that we're going to lose some amount of spin. And that doesn't necessarily just affect distance control. It also affects how much spin left and right, how much curvature the shot's going to have. At the end of the day, you just have less control when you don't know exactly how much spin you're going to put on it. So from the rough, if you have anything between the club face and ball, you add 2 yards to the baseline number, and you only get more conservative from there based on how bad the lie is. And the key for this one is the lesser of two evils. You've got to add that number onto the baseline as you're moving away from water hazards. So coming back to number 4 at Stanford, if we pretended that instead of this being a par 3, it were actually a par 4 and we were coming out of the rough, well, again, we were 168 yards. Our baseline number is 8. A water hazard is 3. 8 plus 3 is 11, plus 2 more at a minimum for the rough. So now we're 13 yards left of the right edge of the green. So we're aiming 2 yards even left of right here. You simply are just needing to get pretty conservative. But the key to this is back to expectation. On the PGA Tour, from 160 yards in the rough, they average 3.23 strokes to hole out. I mean, you just don't need, I mean, that's not even considering this situation where we've got a small green, a bunker, a water hazard, all kinds of other stuff. The scoring average from the rough to this particular hole location, I guarantee you would be coming closer to bogey than it is to par for sure. From 100 yards in the rough on the PGA Tour, they average 3.03 strokes to hole out. They average over par from 100 yards in the rough. There is only one player in the history of the PGA Tour who's under par cumulatively from the rough. That's Tiger. You're simply in a bad spot. Once you're out of the fairway, you're in a bad spot. But this is the critical thing. Again, when I was caddying for Zalatoris at the 2014 Texas Amateur, where all of this began, there were times when he was in the fairway with in the rough with a fairly decent lie, and I was like, can you just put this thing anywhere on the green? And it was kind of a joke because it was like, well, yeah, obviously we can. Well, it's got to be a pretty good shot just based on these numbers from the PGA Tour, and a lot of that is because they're probably playing too aggressively from the rough. If we can take a 17-year-old kid and say, man, just don't screw this up too bad, I guarantee you tour players can do it also, but they look at a decent lie and they think, oh, it's going to come out of here fine. I can still try to make birdie here. They're trying to make birdie from a spot where they're going to average over par for sure. If they were to just make par, they would be picking up little hundredths and tenths of a stroke. It's so simple to accomplish that versus your scoring, your peer group in competition, let alone the PGA Tour, obviously. At its core, competitive golf is obviously about trying to shoot the lowest score for 54 or 72 holes, however long your golf tournament is. That can obviously be broken down into the lowest score per round, which obviously can be broken down into the lowest score per 9, and then by hole, and even by shot. So we really are just trying to gain these little fractions, little hundredths of a shot, just pick them up all over the place, and when you get done with the tournament, or even more importantly, your season or career, and you're going to wind up with the results you deserve based on your abilities and your work ethic, and you won't wind up finishing every single round thinking, I should have shot lower. Those I should have shot lowers are always because you're trying to get too much out of these simple little situations, like 100 yards from the rough, still trying to get a look at birdie, or whatever it is. It's because you're trying to gain full shots when really all we need to be doing is gaining little hundredths of a shots, and then letting the entire tournament turn that into a large enough total to win. Well, that does it for Analyze with regards to the course conditions and the weather. But as a quick recap, because this really it should be sinking in to some degree now, the decade process is this simple. D distance, how far are we? E expectation, I do think that it's therapeutic to know those expected values to help you remain sane and have a good grasp of what a good shot is and what a bad shot actually is. It's typically from over-analyzing our shots that leads to these emotional decisions and implosions. Next up is C, correct target. That is our baseline number. It is 5% of the length of the shot. It is half of the tens digit, meaning if you're 160 yards, the tens digit is a 16. Half of that is 8. That's our baseline number, which is how far are we aiming from the edge of the green for starters. As we learned last month, the beginning of Analyze is the really important surrounding hazards, water hazards, penalty hazards, deep bunkers where everything's running away from you. Really bad spots that you really don't want to miss your golf shot to. Then this month we went ahead and tightened that up a little bit further by understanding kind of what is an average situation and what's not, and then what situations are a little bit easier that allow us to start getting more aggressive. Fairway run-up that's angling down towards the hole, so you're going to contain the ball closer to the hole rather than it running away from you constantly. We have course conditions being soft, weather conditions being calm, weather conditions being windier, so we're going to start adding to that baseline number, getting, air quotes, more conservative because of the weather that day and losing control of our golf ball. We understand that if we're in the rough, it's not that it's difficult to get the ball out of the rough, it's that we're going to lose some portion of spin, which is going to make us lose control of our golf ball. We add all these things up, and next thing you know, we need to have the discipline to actually hit it there.